realization was coming to me over a period of time where I was looking into things that you would find replete throughout every culture as far back as you could go in history and as far across the world as you can go. And there seems to be the four pillars are philosophy, religion, science, and art. And there is a form of those four things in every culture that I have found. So what I noticed was not only will you find that within a culture, but I find it within cycles of time. You'll have a philosophical era, a religious era, a scientific era, and then an artistic era. And it's kind of loose to be able to say it this crude and elementary, but it seems that the artistic era brings together the pieces of the philosophy, the religion, and the science. So when you look at, let's say, when monotheism was introduced roughly around Akhenaten, beyond that time you begin noticing in Greece there's a huge philosophical era. And then beyond that, we go into the next few hundred years, obviously around the time of the Crusades and before and a little beyond that, you have this era where religion is really the zeitgeist, pushing, pushing the mind forward. And then it seems around the Industrial Revolution, actually when Europe was being inundated with more influence and more trade and more barter, you start noticing that a lot more of the rich families coming in from different areas, setting up shop and actually taking a look at what was going on in Europe at the time with this heavy religious influence, and they were bringing reason to the table, and they were actually, through their scientific intervention, they were actually being able to check out the alignments of the stars and realize that we were not geocentric. It seems that we're more heliocentric, and all these revelations that were coming up using reason. So religion had to kind of bend and start adopting a lot of these new roles, and then eventually the Industrial Revolution comes in, and we're in a full-blown scientific era. And over the next few hundred years, we were marveling in our own brilliance, like marveling at these scientific and technological advancements that we're making. And that brings us up to roughly the time period that we're in now. And when I look at these cycles, you recognize that when one comes to an end, it gets to an apex, and then people start realizing that the potentiality of it has been reached, and it has to kind of break through to a new octave. And that's what I believe that the artistic era is coming in. I wouldn't want to get too much into Aquarius symbolism to show that some of this is actually kind of loosely spoken about, just kind of sticking with it. Once we have realized that we have all this scientific technological advancements, now it comes to how are we going to use it. So we have this understanding of, we know how to, make the computer chip smaller, faster, better, more productive. And now it's, okay, how are we going to use this advanced technology? So I look at the way the internet has been used, connecting people in real time. And then you have these internet documentaries, and people are putting out full films, let's say an hour to 2 hours in length, and it's changing people's lives, millions of people's lives because of, let's say, loose change and zeitgeist. These films that are just little seeds, wake-up calls, they're not the end-all be-all. They don't have all the information. All they are is a little kick in the ass to wake people up a little bit, to say, okay, maybe I should be questioning my government a little more. Maybe I should be questioning my own reality. Maybe I should question my own thought processes. And people start taking a little bit more personal responsibility. And then they start using these art forms, films and music and what have you, to freely disperse to as many people as they can. And that was a new paradigm, whereas before there was the economic model where you wouldn't come up with a product if you didn't know how you were going to make the bottom line, if you didn't know what the brass tacks was. And then you reach this era where people are now giving out all their artwork for free, and they're really just trying to get the message out. So it's bypassing a lot of people's skepticism on feeling like they're being sold something all the time, at least economically. When I make a comparison between art and magic, I go back in time to what magic where magic may have come from. And obviously there's a breakdown. The farther back you go, there's fewer and fewer people speaking actually and using those terms, magic. But you look at some of the divination forms, let's say the tarot, and you have the magi. And the tarot is meant to be, I believe, less predictive and more reflective. You're seeing a window into the soul, or an aspect of one's consciousness. And you see the magi, and some of the symbolism behind that is really, it's just one individual holding a wand up into the air, and then a hand pointing down to the earth. And in a sense, the vessel, the human body, is a channel by which something, heavenly comes to something earthly. And that really, to me, is a representation that we, as a physical organism, we have something inherent within us that we can tap into, something that many of us don't seem to know how to tap into today, whether we're numbed from pharmaceuticals or the types of food we eat, or just the information has been lost. I believe that the artistic capacity within humanity is actually the link back to what magic would have been, not the Hollywood magic where poof, you're a newt, or poof, you're a monkey now, and see if you can break my spell. This very Hollywood way of looking at it, where it looks like the wand you're holding has the power. When in reality, magic, whether you're holding a wand or an athame, the altar, the candle that never goes out, these are things that reflect an aspect of consciousness and help the magician, the practicing magician, focus any of these forces that were given inherently from birth. So I believe that the actual connection between art and magic, if you're looking at the real tradition of what magic is there's a science based in it. And I forget who actually said this quote, but any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So there really is no disconnect. When you think of magic, it typically always lies beyond the sphere of our logic, but I think it does that because it beckons us to actually expand and absorb more of what there really is. There is more logic beyond what we have. There is more of a scientific order, or higher orders beyond of what we can fathom now. And just our ability to surrender to the fact that we don't know everything, and we can open up to more, then I believe that's the process of expanding consciousness and recognizing that there are higher orders. And when we tap into that, let's say the Greek word for magic is magike techne, and it's the art of a magus. And I believe that art is, and the creative capacity of being able to envision, is the bridge between our level of logic right now, our level of consciousness, and the yearning that brings us out to actually expand and absorb more of this order, so higher orders. So basically what that's getting at is art is our bridge, our ability to imagine, our ability to use these capacities that we were given from birth, the artistic faculty, the imaginative faculty, I believe is a way that we can actually look beyond to explore and in a sense, reach our hands out into the darkness and feel beyond our logic, and recognize that there is also a leap of faith that happens. And some would call that the surrendering point. Some say that to have faith, you're not having faith in some external deity, you're having faith that you will be able to pick up on the signals and the vibrations and the subtleties of higher orders that are actually working within you at all times. So I believe that art, today we wouldn't call it magic because that's kind of a bastardized term, but I believe that everybody resonates with, yeah, we all have an artistic capacity, whether it be very little, whether some people say, yeah, I know if I really put my energy towards it, I could probably come up with a song or dance a little more, do something in the artistic realm. But I think those are really just like, let's say, dance and painting. I think those are avenues to allow us to explore what art is, but that's not art per se. Those are skills. And I think a true magician is really just somebody who recognizes a higher order, and they are using that art form or that craft to be able to channel it through their physical being. And in that respect, then a magician really isn't practicing magic. They're practicing their art. They're practicing a craft. They're using something that is tried and true. There is a science to it. But to others who haven't been able to really cognize what that is or bring it into their logic, it looks like magic. So I do very much so believe that art is that seed within us that many of us have explored, maybe many of us haven't explored, but our artistic capacity is that bridge, is that portal or that conduit by which magic comes into our life. And I think a lot of the magic will first start showing up in our lives when we start taking a leap of faith and looking for the synchronicities that are abundant in our life. And I think that once you call something in, it's not necessarily you that's calling in, but you're remaining open to see that this is a potential reality. And you begin seeing that these synchronicities happen in your life. And then you're like, wow, I called that in. Yes, because it's possible. An artist sees patterns. They're able to recognize patterns. And life, I believe, is an infinite amount of patterns. And if you're able to recognize a pattern, then as an artist does, they recognize new patterns and they bring it in to the paradigm. So other people may look at that pattern and say, I've never picked up on putting it that way or delivering it that way. Art and magic, as I was saying, it really is, it seems to be a conduit by which it can come from several different places, and some of it I believe can come directly from source, directly from the heart. Some of it can come directly from agenda, if you would want to limit to those words. And the agenda sometimes, especially watching TV, it's quite obvious to see. When you have the eyes to see it, you're not just looking at the content, you're looking at the delivery of it. And then you kind of boil it down to, okay, what is being delivered mostly through primetime television, through most movies and most commercials. Commercials, maybe not these two things that I'm going to mention, but movies and shows, you'll see violence and sex. And those are two specific things that you see replete throughout media is aggressiveness, violence, and sex, but not lovemaking. It's just raw, primal, animalistic, just sex and violence, basically. And it takes a discerning eye to see that, but you have to wonder why when you tap into those things, they're very powerful. You can really reach people by using sex and violence. You have their attention with that. There are other ways to grab people's attention and to really get a point across, but it's it's very rarely seen when people are not coming from a vengeful place in television. Usually, we in media we're glorifying the people who are a little bit of a badass, dare I say. The people who they're not really 100% pure. They seem to have something that people can resonate with. Like, yeah, I would do the same thing as that guy, or if my family was killed by the mafia, I would do the same thing, and I would go and kill all their families in a more torturous way to show them you don't mess with me, type of thing. And that seems to be the type of morality that's bred. So in media, the way that I see that is being used, art and magic, let's say in movies, there's a specific science to the three-act structure within a movie, and you have Act One, Act Two, and Act Three. Act One, you're setting up the characters, you're setting up the setting nowadays. This is where we are. These are the characters, and then you introduce an issue or a problem, and that sends the hero off on a journey to solve that problem, and the tension just grows and grows and grows throughout Act Two. In Act Two, you're learning more about why this is an issue to these specific characters, so you're becoming invested in the characters, and then all of a sudden, there's a crisis point, and that turns into Act 3, and there's a climax, and that's the big showdown, the final battle. That's the most intense part of it. And then there's a resolving act in Act 3. So Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I can't remember the exact words that Wilhelm Reich used, but he mentioned I believe it was 3 or 4 stages of sex, and it really just has to do with charge, release, and then the release of that charge. So there's a charge, there's a maintaining and a building of that charge, and then there's a climax and a release. And that is the arc of sex, but that is also the arc of charging a physical organism in some way. And you'll notice throughout movies, there's always setups in the beginning and a payoff at the end. So a setup at the beginning would, let's say, I use the example in my talk, there's a movie called Taken with Liam Neeson. His daughter is taken into sex slavery, and he's chasing after the people, or the only lead that he knows of, he's chasing after this guy to find his daughter. And this guy that he's chasing after jumps off a bridge onto a boat. And Liam Neeson has the chance to make that leap, metaphorically, and specifically, but he doesn't actually jump. There's something that stops him, fear or whatever, and he decides not to, and he realizes he just let the only lead to his daughter go. So you realize that's a setup, that's in the beginning, and then by the end, you know he's going to get that opportunity one more time, and he better take it this time. So that's a payoff. So what that shows in this 3-act structure is that something was learned. There was something that was recognized in the beginning, and it was learned by the end of it. So this is showing, to me, this is an example of showing that art is used to actually bring the audience into an experience and then charge them with that experience, very literally. So that experience is being embodied by the people who are watching it. And that's why you actually see, when you're watching a horror movie or a chase scene or some very tense scene, you'll see the people watching the movie, they're sitting on a comfy couch in no danger, but they're on the edge of their seat and their muscles are all tense and they're getting really excited. Why? Because they're actually empathizing, and they're in part they are experiencing exactly what the hero, the protagonist and the antagonist are experiencing in the film. And so this is just showing a little bit of how these messages are applied subconsciously. While you're paying attention to one thing in the film, you're paying attention to the focal point, you're also listening to the soundtrack, and the soundtrack is building tension. And it's extremely important to pay attention to soundtrack in films, because if you were to actually take a horror movie and strip out the soundtrack and then put The Village People, like young man, in a horror film, it would completely change the vibe. It would be very hard to get into it the same way. So that's what's happening outside on the fringes of your attention, whereas you're looking and your eyes take most of your energy. What you're seeing, what you're hearing is taking a little bit of a back seat. So in a sense, you're being programmed with that type of a vibe. So you have content and delivery, and the delivery has a lot to do with the soundtrack and the way things are put across in the film. So on the topic of how art and magic are used nowadays, now that we understand that this is a structure and a science of being able to give an experience to the audience. So Hollywood is giving experiences to the audience and actually charging that body with that experience. And they know the technology of the biological organism that we call the body. They know that in our anatomy we have an enteric nervous system, and that nervous system records emotional memory, and it records trauma, and it actually affects us hormonally, chemically, emotionally, in many, many ways. So we are being charged with something where we are living an experience that we've actually never truly experienced. We're seeing somebody else. It's almost through an avatar, through the actors and the actresses. We're experiencing something, and it's recording themselves, encrypting and embedding themselves into our neurology, the neurology of the gut. And from that point, you would then just have to wonder, okay, if this is programming, what are we being programmed with? And then it comes down to, well, you just have to look at the morality of what's being given to us. You see very low levels of morality, and as the years go by, you see less and less morality in media. In commercials, you'll see so much sex symbolism. In movies, it's violence and sex, and usually they're making the heroes less and less truly noble and admirable, and being able to recognize that violence causes harm not just to the other person, but to yourself. Whatever you do to others, you are actually imprinting yourself with that very same energy. So we're actually idolizing people who are causing harm and using revenge and using lower forms of morality to get what they want. The educational model seems to be um, it seems to be deliberate in several different ways. Now, I can understand, and I would probably get some arguments as to why school is a certain amount of hours long in a certain time period of the day, and it's the first thing that you experience throughout the day. Usually, people don't go to school later in the day. That's higher education, college. They'll let you do night classes, but K through 12, you wake a child up and you give them breakfast, and then you send them out to about 7, 8 hours roughly of school. And school is sitting in a square room. Usually there's very little art, very little to evoke imagination. There's a two-dimensional wall and one person standing in front of you telling you all this intellectual information that is going to be needed to be regurgitated perfectly, identically, for you to get a good grade onto a piece of paper the following week. So that's an overgeneralization, obviously. But in K through 12, it seems that this peak hour during the day, we're being put into a beta state. So that's one of the brainwave patterns that we're in. There's 4 of them, but the beta state. What happens is the blood flow actually reduces out of the prefrontal cortex, which is the imaginative, the creative, the holistic thinking, abstract thinking mind, and it puts us into reactive thinking. And it's the alert and also on guard type of state. And this is any type of education where you're sitting in a room and you're just listening to one person, two-dimensional backboard, nothing, no music, nothing to actually add a vibe. It's very analytical, intellectual, reactionary. It seems to be that what the educational system is very impersonal to the individuals and to the children. So children, I believe, are born with an amazing capacity for art, an amazing capacity for their imagination, and you see in them they'll go off and they'll pretend, and they'll make this whole make believe world, and they'll play inside of that world, and they will actually be able to envision it so much that they are able to interact with other characters within this imaginary realm. And we seem to squash that out, and we squash out the individuality and the imagination, and we make it very impersonal. Okay, there's one lesson we're going to learn. We're going to learn when Christopher Columbus reached the United States, what ship did he arrive on, what was the exact date, where did he land, who did he come in contact with, intellectual data, factual information. It has to be this, it can't be this or this or this or this. And next week, I want you to remember that so well that when I put a piece of paper in front of you, you can regurgitate that information verbatim. To me, what that looks like is that's exactly what we're doing with computers. So we're in this computer age, and what you do is you enter in, you're writing a text document, or you're entering, something into the computer so you can recall it later on. Next week, you're like, oh, what were the notes I wrote down? Let me type in the command and hit save or hit print or whatever it might be, hit open, and it will regurgitate all that information instantly. And computers serve people in a sense. But when you turn children into a computer-like module, then what are they serving? And it seems to be that we're thrust into an educational system, and we're brought K through 12, and then we have higher education. Oh, well, here's where your individuality. Let's say a guidance counselor will say, well, it seems that you like these things, so here are the jobs in our system that you can fit yourself into. And when you get past, your higher education, or if you don't go on to college, you just get past high school, we'll fit you into this curriculum so you can grind the gears of the machine that is already working. So you have to wonder, what kind of machine is this that wants impersonalized information, data regurgitation, being able to take a command and just follow that command, not ask questions, not really balance that information that you're learning based upon what resonates or whether you feel it's right or not. You don't want the children asking questions in this machine. You just want them to take a command and do it. That's like, obviously, you don't want a computer that would have to question your motives as to why you want to recall a document. So you don't want children having to question your motives when you say, I want you to go bomb a village in Uganda. So it seems to be that the educational system is impersonalizing and removing people from this, the individual, and homogenizing it, turning it into conformity and ultra conformity. So in the educational system, that's really what I see happening, is we are being, in a sense, kind of the creativity and the individuality is being bred out of us slowly but surely, as if that is specifically what educational system is designed to do, is to create conformity and less questions. And the one thing that I would say is, you look back into any stories that you hear. When anyone hears about the Holocaust, people would be like, how could a human being do that to another human being? How could a few human beings do this to a mass amount of human beings and mutilate and cause so much suffering and torture? And then you see today's police brutality. And then you ask the police, why are you arresting me for something so ridiculously stupid? If you don't piss them off and have them beat the crap out of you just for questioning their authority, they would mainly, you would hear them just quoting, oh, it's just my job, mate, just following orders. Why am I kicking you out of your house? I know you have a family, I know it's freezing outside, but it says on this paper that the books aren't balanced. If me, the human being, I wish I could do something for you, but it says here on this piece of paper in this litigation that we have to kick you out of your house. I'm just doing my job, mate. I could get fired, and then I'd be in your position. Sorry, type of deal. So it really seems that it is a system. It's a system of indoctrination into asking less questions and being able to take a command and just follow it without asking questions. And I always use the example in World War II. There was supposed to be one more bomb dropped, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. There was one more bomb on its way being dropped. And the story goes, whether this can be truly verified in this way or not, but the story goes, the guy who was about to drop the bomb thought of something very, very simple, and I think this is kind of, symbolic. He was thinking on his way, he had his orders to drop this bomb, and he just thought, what would my mother think if she knew I was about to drop a bomb that would level an entire city, knowing that there's innocent men, women, and children all around? What would my mother say? And he just turned around. He faced court-martial, he got arrested for it, but that very simple little thing, what would my mother think? You know? I'm just following orders, but yeah, what is this actually doing? And when you think, what does that mean when you're saying, what would my mother think? What are you calling upon in that moment? You're actually calling upon some type of humanity that you were connected with at some point. And I'm not going to get into everything that metaphor represents to me, but I just think that's really beautiful. He asked a very simple question that anybody can relate with. What would my mother think if I were going to be carrying out this order? And that was a beautiful example of somebody who was just going to follow his orders and then had this moment where he became a human again. Well, yeah, so I've been studying a lot of Taoist healing methods within the past few years, Qigong, Tai Chi, and this abdominal massage called Qine Song. And that really got me into recognizing there's such a beautiful mechanism that we have in front of us, dare I call it a mechanism, a biological machine that has reflex organs on it. So our hands, our feet, our face, our tongue, our teeth, and our ears are all reflex organs, and meaning that we have meridian systems in the body by which vital energy seems to flow. And this energy, when it becomes impeded or it becomes blocked in some way, it typically happens because of a form of trauma or a form of sleepiness, meaning we're not holding our body correctly, we don't have proper form, we don't have proper posture and proper breathing. Therefore, we become sluggish and we kind of kink one of those spots, or let's say a form of trauma, as I was speaking about how electric charges are applied to the body. What happens is if we experience something that causes trauma within us, and trauma is a form of pain that holds a message that we are not able to embody at that moment. We're not able to actually embody the wisdom of that message that the pain is bringing us. So we hold it somewhere in our body as an electromagnetic charge until we are mature enough to be able to process what that message of that pain was. And that becomes stored in our body, primarily in our gut, in our enteric nervous system. So there's neurology that actually lines the fascia, and that actually lines all the organs. And it's the neurons just like in our brain, but it stores a different type of energy. It stores emotional energy. So all these meridians that run from the face, the feet, the teeth, the tongue, the ears, like I said, all these reflex organs. What happens is there may be a point in our stomach where one of those meridians is kinked or blocked, and it's blocking the natural cyclic flow of energy. So what happens at that point is that you'll actually start noticing things happening, so here, right here, these little spots on my beard, this would be the lung area, and this would be the sexual reproductive organs. So when I first started noticing that there are patches of hair missing on my beard, the first thing, because I had been learning about this, is, okay, this is a reflex organ, and this is a metaphor. This is actually showing that there is something going on within my gut. And that actually really helped me, knowing these subtle forms of science, this ancient form of science. Actually, it helped me recognize that, okay, this isn't just an issue on my chin, this is an issue inside me. And by recognizing that this isn't giving me the answer, this is hinting towards the answer, but I have to meet it halfway. So, long story short, answering the question, how does the physical body actually connect to art and magic? How does it show itself in this biological finite machine, this infinite source showing itself somehow in our body? I find that that's what's beautiful about the human body, is that it will give you metaphors, it will give you ways to understand what's going on inside by the reflex organs, by showing you on your hands if there's a spot, or if there's pain, or if there's twitching in one of your fingers. They're actually all connected to a meridian system that connects into the gut. And then if you can follow it into the gut, then you look at the liver, how it holds fear, or I'm sorry, anger and frustration. The kidneys hold fear. The small intestines, the same as the heart, passion, joy, anger, frustration, things like that. The small intestines, that's where you absorb a lot of your nutrients. The lungs and the large intestine, the colon, they're connected, and that's a metal energy. And that has to do with metal discernment, being able to decide what you're going to keep and what you're going to get rid of. And, in the gut, you have the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and the descending colon. And the ascending colon in Taoist, traditional Chinese medicine philosophy, the ascending colon is things that you aren't aware of, things that you aren't quite aware of that you're dealing with emotionally. So it's touching the neurology of your enteric nervous system, and it's holding on to an emotional charge. And when you have an emotional charge that applies itself to your colon, it applies it in such a way that the ascending colon represents things that you're not aware of that you're dealing with. The transverse colon represents things that you're just becoming aware of that you're dealing with. And then once it goes through this little flexure, this little kink, and it turns into the descending colon, that's when you are now ready to use the metal element and discern. You're cutting through, this is what I'm going to absorb with nutrients, and this is what I'm going to get rid of. So your body is actually getting rid of it. And it's connected with the lungs because your breathing is actually very connected with your ability to digest. Now, when I say digest, I'm speaking about food, but I'm also speaking about when you have problems with your digestion, that's there because there's actually, it is holding on to food that may be very difficult to digest, but it's holding on to that food in a way that also represents the things in your life that were hard to digest, like losing a family member early in life and not being able to process the charge of what is that beyond realm when somebody that I love was here one moment and then gone the next. A child may not be able to process that. So throughout their life, as they are beginning to understand and have the capacity to process those types of traumas, they actually work themselves through the whole process of the colon. And then we have, the stomach, spleen, pancreas, which is the earth element. And there's a whole, your gut has all of the elements in it, it has all of the emotions, and it has everything that you really need to metaphorically recognize what you have dealt with in your past and what you're holding on to, a lot of trauma that we're holding on to. So the reason why I believe this to be extremely important is because this, as we were speaking about before, this physical body, this is the touchstone upon which all of our, and not just the physical body, but what this is actually reflecting. It will reflect things that are far more subtle than what you actually see in the mirror, the physical flesh and blood. Your body is actually reflecting things on an emotional level a lot of times, psychological level, energetic level, and we are gifted this beautiful body to be able to see what we are dealing with. So we see varying densities of what we are dealing with, and it comes to the physical body when we're not paying attention for years and years and years, and we have this problem that builds up through varying levels of density. It will then turn itself into a physical element, so it actually stops your being able to just go on blindfolded through life. It actually stops you in your tracks. Like when you get sick, you can't sometimes get up and get out of bed and go to work and do the daily 9 to 5 and what you think you should be doing with your life. It stops you in your tracks and says, no, rest. You need rest. You're not giving, for the past 5 years, you haven't given yourself enough rest. Now we're going to force it upon you. Now it has become a physical illness to where you don't have a choice. You're going to lay in bed until you've passed and detoxed and gotten rid of whatever this is for the time being. So that's what I believe is truly beautiful about the body, because we look at this as a very scientific, analytical, finite machine, but what it's showing us is that there is something else going on within this physical body, and we can use the physical body and the signs that we see as being a reflection of that which we are dealing with, whether it be emotionally, psychologically, or even if we're having trouble in a decision in life. We don't know if we should stay with this job that really insults our morals, or find another job or another path that doesn't seem to pay nearly as much, and then that gets into the fear of how am I going to survive and support my family and yada yada yada. But do I support my family with low morality, or do I take a leap of faith and know that things are going to be taken care of somehow, that I'm always supported by this earth? So there are these leaps of faith that sometimes our body is the perfect example to show us, okay, you know what? You really need to focus on your health more than your job, or your health more than the money that you're making, or the agenda that you have in mind. And unfortunately, a lot of people, they will hold on to their illness and be like, I don't have time for cancer. I don't have time for this missing limb. I know farmers that they'll have an accident and a finger will be missing, and they'll just be like, let's tape it up. I could go to the doctor and see what we can do, but let's tape it up because we need to finish this field. It's like, okay, I get it to an extent, but how much do you respect this gift, this beautiful thing that we were given from birth? How much do you actually respect it at the expense of your agenda? Now, obviously, there's a balancing point, because then there's also a path that you're walking, and you recognize that this body, you're going to give it back. And what is more important, the path serving others or the physical body? And I don't really have those answers. I'm still walking the path on, on my own. But it's, to me, it's recognizing that there is a balance. There's really understanding that it's not going to the extremes of like, oh well, if I can't walk the path, I'm just going to go drink myself into a coma. Or if I'm, I want to be in health, I'm going to do it so rigidly that I have no flexibility, and I'm basically an automaton or a robot working towards my health. Well, that's kind of being a little too rigid and maybe not getting the balance either. So to me, our body is a spiritual teacher. It's transient, it grows, it evolves, it's always becoming something else, it's always in a process or some form of transition. Um, so, with that being said, the process eventually gets beyond your physical health, and then your emotional health, and then it keeps going. And what I've at least found is that you do get to a point where then you even question the processes of, how do I approach the moment at all when somebody is coming up and challenging me, or somebody is coming up and they're very lovey, but you can tell they're after something. There's something that they're putting a hook in somehow, and you can't tell what it is. And let's say it's been happening for years, and you know that something's happening there, but you're not sure exactly what it is. Then really it just comes to a matter, to me, it has come to a matter of surrendering to, I recognize what this vibration is, and I'm just going to observe. I'm not going to place my judgments upon it, and recognize what it is. And then I've come to recognize that you know when you're coming from a certain place within. And then sometimes when somebody comes up and they say something to you and it's challenging to you, do you hop into a defensive mode, and like, you could even be saying the right things, but where is it coming from? You could be saying, something that sounds very right in verbiage, but where is it coming from? What is the body language that's how is this coming through you? Is it coming from a place where you are actually looking to serve the individual in front of you, or is it coming as a jab? Because I get that a lot, quite a bit. I'll have people come up to me after my talks and say, Ben, I really loved it, but there's this and this and this issue with what I saw with what you were saying, and I love that. I really thrive on being taught. I do believe that I'm a student on tour around the world, getting taught from the university, and I've been blessed with the ability that a lot of amazing people come into my life, and they all have something to share. And I've come to realize that there are ways that I respond to those things, and there's a surrender to the fact that whether somebody knows how to put something across to me or not, that they saw something that they noticed, I'm not here to argue whether, no, you just didn't get what I was saying. Why, symbolically, metaphorically, would somebody be bringing something to my attention at this time? So I try to remain as open as possible to what they may be getting at between the lines. And that comes from a certain form of surrendering to, like, okay, I'm not trying to make it look like I'm a teacher when I'm going out and doing these talks in front of hundreds of people, and people will come up to me afterwards and say, this is what I've noticed, yada, yada, yada. And it's the way that they put it across that allows, I mean, for me to either immediately be able to absorb it, or sometimes when I feel like they're not looking to serve in any way, they're hooking something in and they're establishing, up, Ben, you haven't discovered this yet. This is where I am and this is where you are. And I recognize that, but even in those moments, I recognize that this is good for me, a moment for me to be the student rather than to correct them on what they're doing, because it's not for me to tell them what their behavior is and yada yada yada. For me, it's a certain form of surrender to, even when it doesn't feel like they're serving me with what they're saying. something coming through them is still serving me at that point. It's a matter of looking beyond the personality that's looking to insult and jab, and recognize that even though I don't resonate with the way they're putting it across, why would this be happening in my moment right now in front of me? So it really is, it's a form of humility and surrender to the fact that no matter what, it's not a ranking system for me anymore, whereas it started that way for sure. And it's a subtle, in a sense, a surrender to, I'm always the student of the moment. And it becomes a very beautiful process for me because it allows for me to see the humanity within anybody, even if they are the ones who are challenging me or insulting me. I recognize that there is a seed within them that is still very beautiful and very pure. I actually have been noticing, okay, so I've traveled throughout Europe, throughout Australia several times, South America, all throughout North America, um, and I've traveled quite a bit throughout my life before I was even specifically doing what I'm doing now. I'm an army brat, so I was constantly traveling in and out of the country, living in third world areas. What I've noticed since the beginning of my travels, all the way up to the point to where I started to wake up, is I started to, whether I could say being called into areas or into company where the puzzle pieces along the way seem to just be more conveniently placed upon my path. So I can't necessarily say that I believe that the world is waking up, because I feel that I'm waking up to what the world has always been, in a way. And what I've been noticing more is that I'm starting to make more connections with different things that I've experienced and how it's coming together as one ever evolving experience rather than a bunch of random separate experiences with different people. I'm noticing these threads that connect all of these experiences, and those threads are becoming quite a bit more pronounced or easily accessible and easily viable and seeable and hearable and tasteable and tangible in a way that I've never experienced before, to where synchronicity seems to be quickening. And so this awakening process, again, I'm very careful to say whether or not I believe that the world is waking up, but I know that my connection to it seems to be waking up. And what happens in my travels is I start to be thrust into these situations that I would not have even been able to imagine. Yesterday was one of them. I just thought it was going to be a really nice road trip to a really nice area called Margaret River, and it turned into a very humbling, beautiful, one of the most gorgeous scenes I've seen. But what was happening inside was actually a surrender to the reality that I'm not that I would want to escape it, but it almost seems like an inescapable reality that seems to be presenting itself to me every single day, more and more and more. That there, how do I want to say this? There really does seem to be some type of intelligence, if I would want to use that word, that is connecting all the puzzle pieces of this path into one evolving organism or one evolving process that I seem to be waking up inside of, rather than apart from being the witness of outside. I'm recognizing the subtleties that are coming through me in the moment, to whereas I recognize all the things that are happening out here, they merely represent some of the things that are happening more within me, and I seem to be connecting with people on a different level, and what I'm connecting with inside of them is nothing more than what I've always felt within me at all times. And the journey outwards, the farther I go across the planet, meeting more people deeper into the jungle, deeper into the outback, it seems to be as if that's a parable, journeying deeper, deeper, and deeper into my own experience and my own life, and what's actually this process that's going on within me. So I don't know if any of that was actually legible or understandable, but Yeah, it's hard to eloquate sometimes. It's hard to actually even put into words. Let me say it this way: whatever is happening, I'm falling in love in a way that I've never experienced before. And through this falling in love seems to be the emergence of my being able to discern between how I used to fool myself, how I used to become overly excited about opportunities that never served me in the long run. They would just add instant gratification. I'm able to recognize through this surrender and this falling in love that I am supported by something, some force, and just that feeling of support. If I had to use an analogy, like back in the arms of mother.